The rifle in Elena Martinez's hands was 30 years old, its wooden stock scarred from countless missions, its metal components showing the patina of age and careful maintenance. The younger recruits at the Denver Federal Building snickered behind their high-tech equipment, their carbon fiber weapons gleaming with digital scopes and laser targeting systems. They whispered about the museum piece the old lady carried, completely unaware that this weathered weapon had more confirmed eliminations than their entire unit combined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. In 12 hours, when modern technology failed and sophisticated equipment malfunctioned in the chaos of real combat, Elena's ancient gear would be the only thing standing between a kidnapped senator's daughter and certain death. The mockery would turn to desperate respect, and the woman they dismissed as outdated would prove that sometimes the old ways are the only ways that work when everything else falls apart. The morning mist clung to the mountains surrounding Clearwater, Montana, like a shroud, hiding secrets that were better left undisturbed. Elena Martinez stood on the covered porch of her tactical training facility, watching the sun struggle through layers of gray clouds while her coffee steamed in the crisp mountain air. At 52, she moved with the calculated precision of someone who had learned that unnecessary movement could mean the difference between living and dying, though the people of Clearwater saw only a quiet woman who ran the local shooting range and repaired firearms with an almost supernatural skill. Mountain View Tactical Training sat on 40 acres of carefully maintained wilderness, far enough from town that the sound of gunfire was absorbed by pine trees and granite cliffs. To the locals, Elena was simply the woman who taught their teenagers gun safety and helped hunters sight their rifles before deer season. They respected her knowledge but never questioned where it came from, accepting her explanation that she'd learned from her father and grandfather, both military men who understood the value of old-fashioned craftsmanship. What they didn't know was that Elena Martinez had died 15 years ago in a classified operation in Afghanistan, officially killed when her transport helicopter was shot down over hostile territory. The woman who emerged from those mountains 3 months later was someone else entirely, carrying new papers and a carefully constructed background that placed her in small-town Montana, where questions were rarely asked and privacy was respected like a religious doctrine. Her workshop was a testament to forgotten arts and obsolete technologies. While modern tactical operators carried rifles made of polymer and aluminum, their stocks adjustable and their barrels threaded for suppressors that cost more than most people's cars, Elena's armory consisted of weapons that belonged in military museums. Her primary rifle was a modified M14, its action hand-tuned to tolerances that modern manufacturing had abandoned in favor of mass production. The scope mounted on top was German-made, crafted by artisans who understood that precision was more important than digital readouts and ballistic computers. Her sidearm was even more anachronistic, a 1911 pistol that had been manufactured during the Korean War and subsequently modified by military armorers who knew their craft the way surgeons knew anatomy. The grip was checkered by hand, worn smooth in places where her thumb and fingers had found their natural positions through thousands of hours of practice. Most operators would have laughed at the 7-round capacity, preferring high-capacity magazines that could deliver 20 rounds without reloading. But Elena had learned that accuracy mattered more than volume of fire. The body armor hanging in her equipment locker looked like something from a military surplus store, heavy Kevlar plates in a canvas carrier that modern soldiers would consider primitive compared to their lightweight ceramic composites and integrated communication systems. But Elena's vest had stopped bullets in 17 different countries, and she trusted its proven reliability more than any computer-designed protection system that had never been tested in actual combat. On this particular morning, Elena was teaching a basic marksmanship course to 3 local teenagers whose parents wanted them to understand firearm safety before hunting season. The students were typical Montana kids, raised around guns but lacking the fundamental understanding of precision shooting that separated recreational shooters from true marksmen. She watched them struggle with modern sporting rifles, their shots scattered across targets like confetti, their frustration growing with each missed shot. "Miss Martinez," called out Jake Thompson, 17 years old, and convinced that more expensive equipment would solve his accuracy problems. "My dad says if I get one of those new rifles with the computer scopes, I'll shoot better." This old gun just isn't accurate enough. Elena set down her coffee and walked to the shooting bench where Jake was wrestling with a rifle that cost more than some people earned in a month. The weapon featured every modern innovation: adjustable stock, free-floating barrel, match-grade trigger, and a scope that could calculate windage and elevation automatically. Despite all this technology, Jake's shots were landing 6 inches apart at 100 yards, a grouping that would be embarrassing at any serious shooting competition. Without saying a word, Elena picked up her ancient M14, its weight substantial in her hands like a tool that understood its purpose. She settled into a shooting position that looked deceptively casual, her breathing controlled and her grip consistent in ways that couldn't be taught through instruction manuals. The rifle's action was smooth as silk, each component fitted to its neighbors with the precision of Swiss clockwork. She fired 5 shots in rapid succession, the heavy reports echoing off the mountain walls like thunder. When the ceasefire was called and they examined the target, all 5 bullet holes could be covered by a silver dollar. The teenagers stared in amazement while Elena calmly began cleaning her rifle with practiced movements that spoke of decades of experience. "It's not about the equipment," she said quietly, running a cleaning rod through the barrel with methodical strokes. "Modern gear can make things easier, but it can't replace fundamental skills. This rifle is older than your parents, but it was built by people who understood that consistency matters more than convenience." Sarah Chen, 16, and the most serious student in the group, watched Elena's cleaning process with fascination. "Why do you use such old equipment if new stuff is available?" Elena paused in her cleaning, considering how much truth she could share without revealing secrets that were classified beyond the teenager's comprehension. "Because old equipment teaches you things that modern gear can't. When you don't have computer assistance, you learn to read wind by watching grass move. When your scope doesn't automatically adjust for distance, you learn to estimate range by understanding how terrain affects visibility. When your rifle doesn't have a match trigger, you learn to control your own muscles instead of relying on mechanical assistance." She reassembled the rifle with movements that flowed like choreography, each component finding its place without conscious thought. Modern equipment fails, batteries die, electronics malfunction, computers crash. But skill and experience never need batteries, and they work in conditions that would destroy any electronic system. The lesson continued, with Elena demonstrating techniques that had been passed down through generations of military marksmen, methods that required patience and practice rather than technological solutions. She taught them to read wind patterns by observing vegetation, to estimate distances using their natural vision, and to control their breathing in ways that synchronized with their heartbeat. These were skills that took years to master, techniques that modern training programs had largely abandoned in favor of equipment-based solutions. As the morning progressed, Elena noticed a black SUV parked on the access road leading to her property, too far away to identify the occupants but close enough to suggest surveillance rather than casual observation. The vehicle had been there for over an hour, its position carefully chosen to provide clear lines of sight while maintaining plausible deniability. Elena had seen enough surveillance operations to recognize the signs, and the familiar chill of being watched settled into her bones like an old injury responding to changing weather. She concluded the lesson early, sending the teenagers home with homework assignments that involved dry fire practice and ballistics calculations that would teach them to understand their equipment rather than simply operate it. After they left, Elena secured her facility with the thorough attention to detail that had kept her alive through operations that officially never happened. The workshop was her sanctuary, filled with tools and equipment that told the story of a career spent in places where superior firepower mattered less than superior skill. Hand-loading equipment occupied one corner, where Elena crafted ammunition to tolerances that commercial manufacturers couldn't match. Each cartridge was assembled individually, powder charges measured to the tenth of a grain, bullet seating depths adjusted for optimal accuracy in her specific rifles. Her communication equipment was similarly anachronistic, consisting of radio gear that operated on frequencies abandoned by modern military forces in favor of digital systems that offered encryption and satellite connectivity. But Elena's radios were simple, reliable, and nearly impossible to jam or intercept, qualities that had proven invaluable when sophisticated equipment failed in the field. The hidden bunker beneath her workshop contained the rest of her professional equipment, gear that had been carefully preserved for 15 years in climate-controlled storage. night vision devices that used image intensification tubes instead of thermal imaging, navigation equipment that relied on compass bearings rather than GPS satellites, and medical supplies that could treat traumatic injuries without requiring electronic monitoring systems. Most importantly, the bunker contained her operational history, documented in handwritten journals that recorded every mission, every target, every lesson learned through experience that couldn't be taught in any military school. These notebooks were her real treasure, containing knowledge that was worth more than any modern equipment because it represented the distilled wisdom of someone who had survived when others hadn't. As evening approached, Elena performed her daily maintenance routine, cleaning and inspecting equipment that most people would have discarded years ago. Each weapon was disassembled, cleaned, lubricated, and tested according to procedures that ensured reliable function regardless of environmental conditions. This ritual was both practical and meditative, a way of maintaining connection with tools that had become extensions of her will. The black SUV remained in position as darkness fell, its occupants apparently prepared for extended surveillance. Elena noted their location through night vision equipment that revealed two figures in the vehicle, their body language suggesting professional training and military bearing. They were waiting for something or someone, and their presence meant that her carefully constructed anonymity was beginning to unravel. She prepared for the possibility that her peaceful existence in Clearwater was about to end, checking equipment that had been dormant for years and reviewing contingency plans that she hoped never to use. The old gear felt familiar in her hands, like, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Reuniting with trusted friends who understood the weight of shared history. Outside, the Montana wilderness stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars that had witnessed countless human dramas played out in darkness. Elena Martinez settled into her chair by the window, her ancient rifle within easy reach, and prepared to discover whether the past had finally found her hiding place. The mockery she'd endured about her outdated equipment would soon be replaced by something far more dangerous, and she would need every skill and every piece of carefully maintained gear to survive what was coming. The woman who had officially died 15 years ago was about to be reborn, and this time, the stakes would be higher than they had ever been before. The knock on Elena's door came at precisely 6 in the morning, delivered with the authoritative rhythm that only government agents seemed to master. 3 sharp raps, pause, 2 more, then silence while they waited for a response. Elena had been awake for 2 hours, watching the surveillance team through her night vision equipment as they changed shifts and coordinated with additional units that had arrived during the night. Whatever was happening, it was significant enough to warrant a full tactical team. She opened the door to find Captain James Morrison standing on her porch, his dress uniform crisp despite the early hour and mountain humidity. Behind him stood 2 agents in civilian clothes, their bearing unmistakably military even without visible identification. Morrison was younger than Elena had expected, probably mid-30s, with the confident posture of someone who had never been told that his mission was impossible. "Elena Martinez," Morrison said, his voice carrying the flat authority of someone reading from a script. "We need to discuss your previous employment with the United States military." Elena studied the 3 men, noting the way they positioned themselves to control the conversation while maintaining tactical awareness of their surroundings. The surveillance team had done their homework, but they were dealing with someone who had written some of the procedures they were following. "I think you have the wrong person," Elena replied calmly. "I've never served in any military capacity. I run a civilian shooting range and teach firearms safety to local teenagers." Morrison smiled with the patience of someone who held all the cards. "Phoenix 1, formerly of Task Force Nightingale, officially killed in action 15 years ago during Operation Silent Thunder in Afghanistan. Except you weren't killed, were you? You were extracted by a recovery team that found you 3 months after your transport was shot down." The use of her former call sign hit Elena like a physical blow, but she maintained her expression of polite confusion. Phoenix 1 had been buried in classified files that supposedly no one could access, her entire operational history sealed behind security clearances that required presidential authorization to breach. "I'm sorry, but you're mistaken," she said. "Perhaps you should check your records more carefully." Morrison reached into his jacket and produced a tablet, swiping to display satellite imagery that showed Elena's property in remarkable detail. The photos had been taken recently, revealing not only her surface facilities but also thermal signatures that suggested underground construction. Interesting infrastructure for a simple shooting range, Morrison observed. Ground-penetrating radar indicates a substantial underground facility, climate-controlled, and accessed through a concealed entrance in your workshop. The power consumption patterns suggest electronic equipment that requires significant cooling, probably communications gear and computer systems. Elena felt the familiar weight of being hunted, the same sensation that had driven her into hiding years ago. But this time was different. She had built something worth protecting in Clearwater, relationships with people who trusted her, and a life that felt authentic in ways her military career never had. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. Morrison's expression shifted to something approaching respect. "We have a situation that requires your specific expertise. 3 days ago, Senator Patricia Hawthorne's daughter was kidnapped from her college campus in Colorado. The kidnappers are holding her in Black Rock Canyon, a location that presents unique tactical challenges." He swiped the tablet to display topographical maps that showed terrain Elena recognized immediately. Black Rock Canyon was a natural fortress, accessible only through narrow passages that could be easily defended. The rock formations created multiple levels of elevation, providing countless sniper positions and escape routes for anyone familiar with the terrain. "Local SWAT teams have been unsuccessful," Morrison continued. "Military Special Operations units have attempted 2 rescue missions, both failures. The kidnappers seem to have advance warning of every approach, suggesting either superior surveillance capabilities or inside information about our operations." Elena studied the tactical assessments, noting the failed approach routes and casualty reports. The operation bore all the hallmarks of professionals who understood both terrain and military tactics, not typical kidnappers motivated by ransom demands. "Send someone else," Elena said. "There are plenty of qualified operators who can handle difficult terrain." Morrison shook his head. "We've tried. 5 separate teams have failed, resulting in 3 wounded operators and 0 progress toward recovering the target. The weather window is closing, and if we don't extract the senator's daughter within the next 48 hours, the kidnappers will move her to a secondary location beyond our reach." One of the agents behind Morrison stepped forward, producing a second tablet that displayed personnel files. "The kidnappers aren't random criminals. They're led by someone calling himself the Collector, a former military operator who specializes in hostage situations that attract government attention. Intelligence suggests he's specifically targeting high-value individuals to draw elite units into situations where he can study their tactics." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. The profile matched operational patterns she had encountered before, methodical and patient adversaries who treated combat like an academic exercise. "Why me?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Morrison smiled grimly. "Because you're the only operator still alive who successfully completed a mission in Black Rock Canyon. 15 years ago, Task Force Nightingale extracted a CIA asset from that exact location using tactics that officially never existed." The memories came flooding back unbidden. Elena remembered the weight of her gear, the way shadows moved differently in the canyon's narrow passages, and the sound her boots made on loose rock as she navigated terrain that seemed designed to kill anyone foolish enough to enter. That mission had been successful, but barely, and only because she had refused to rely on modern equipment that failed in the canyon's unique electromagnetic environment. "That was a different situation," Elena said. "Different enemy, different objectives, different support structure." "Same terrain," Morrison replied. "Same tactical challenges, same requirement for someone who could operate independently without electronic support. The canyon's mineral composition interferes with radio communications, GPS navigation, and most modern targeting systems. It's like fighting in a technological dead zone." Elena understood the implications immediately. Modern military units depended on electronic systems for everything from navigation to target acquisition. In Black Rock Canyon, those advantages disappeared, leaving only fundamental skills and equipment that functioned regardless of environmental conditions. Morrison produced a final piece of evidence, a photograph that made Elena's blood run cold. The image showed a young woman, probably 19 or 20, with dark hair and intelligent eyes that reminded Elena of someone she had once promised to protect. "Jessica Hawthorne," Morrison said quietly. "Political science major, honor student, volunteers at a homeless shelter every weekend. She's completely innocent, caught in a situation that exists because her father sits on the Senate Intelligence Committee. Elena stared at the photograph, seeing not just another victim but a representation of everyone she had sworn to protect during her years of service. The girl's expression held the same combination of intelligence and vulnerability that Elena had seen in countless civilians whose lives had been disrupted by forces beyond their control. "There's something else," Morrison continued. "The collector sent a message specifically requesting that Phoenix 1 be included in any rescue attempt. He knows who you are, and he wants you to come." The trap was obvious, but Elena also recognized the opportunity it presented. If the collector was specifically targeting her, it meant he considered her a significant threat. More importantly, it suggested that he wasn't entirely confident in his defensive position. Elena walked to her workshop, the 3 government agents following at a respectful distance. Inside, she moved to the equipment lockers that contained her operational gear, weapons and tools that had been carefully maintained despite years of dormancy. Her hands moved automatically to the rifle that had carried her through dozens of missions, its familiar weight reassuring in ways that modern weapons could never match. "Your current tactical teams," she said without turning around. "What equipment are they carrying?" Morrison consulted his tablet. "Standard Special Operations Loadout, Advanced Body Armor, Integrated Communication Systems, Night Vision with Thermal Overlay, GPS navigation, and weapons platforms with computerized fire control systems." Elena nodded, understanding why the previous missions had failed, all of which become useless in Black Rock Canyon. The mineral deposits interfere with electronics, the terrain blocks radio signals, and the multiple elevation levels create thermal shadows that confuse infrared imaging. She pulled her ancient rifle from its case, the wood and metal surfaces showing the patina of age and careful maintenance. Compared to the sleek polymer weapons carried by modern operators, it looked like something from a military museum. "This," she said, holding up the rifle, "doesn't need batteries. It doesn't require GPS satellites or computer assistance. It was built by people who understood that mechanical reliability matters more than technological sophistication." Morrison examined the weapon with professional interest, noting modifications that had been made by military armorers who knew their craft. "That's at least 30 years old." 32, Elena corrected. "Built in 1991, modified in 1995, and carried through 17 successful missions in terrain that destroyed more modern equipment. It's been hand-tuned to tolerances that mass production can't achieve, and every component has been tested under conditions that would break contemporary weapons." She moved to another locker, retrieving body armor that looked primitive compared to current military protection systems. The vest was heavy, constructed from materials that absorbed impact through mass and engineering rather than exotic composites and computer modeling. "This armor stopped bullets in 12 different countries," Elena said, running her fingers along scars in the fabric that marked near-fatal encounters. "It's not as light as modern gear, but it's been proven in actual combat rather than laboratory testing." Morrison's expression shifted from skepticism to grudging respect as Elena continued displaying equipment that looked obsolete but functioned with mechanical precision. Her night vision device used image intensification tubes instead of thermal imaging, providing clear vision without electronic signatures that could be detected by counter-surveillance equipment. Her navigation tools consisted of compass, altimeter, and maps printed on waterproof paper, systems that worked regardless of satellite availability or electromagnetic interference. "The teams we've sent in," Morrison said slowly, "they've been carrying equipment worth more than most people's houses. And you're suggesting that older gear would be more effective?" Elena smiled for the first time since the conversation began. "I'm suggesting that effectiveness depends on the operator, not the equipment. A skilled marksman with a properly maintained rifle will outperform an amateur with a computer-assisted weapon system. But in Black Rock Canyon, the modern equipment becomes a liability because it stops working when you need it most." She pulled out her sidearm, the 1911 pistol that had been manufactured during the Korean War and subsequently modified by military armorers who understood that reliability mattered more than capacity. Morrison examined the weapon, noting the hand-checkered grips and custom trigger work that had been performed by craftsmen who were probably dead. 7 rounds, Morrison observed, Most current sidearms carry twice that capacity. 7 rounds that fire every time you pull the trigger, Elena replied. No electronic safeties to malfunction. No polymer components to crack under stress. No computer systems to freeze in extreme temperatures. This pistol has functioned in desert heat and Arctic cold, in humidity that would destroy electronic components and at altitudes where oxygen levels affect human judgment. Elena moved to her communication equipment, radio gear that operated on frequencies abandoned by modern military forces in favor of digital systems. The radios were bulky compared to current equipment, but they transmitted clear analog signals that couldn't be jammed or decoded by sophisticated electronic warfare systems. Your teams have been going into Black Rock Canyon with equipment that identifies them to anyone monitoring electronic emissions, Elena explained. GPS signals, radio transmissions, electronic signatures from their weapons and armor. They might as well be carrying neon signs announcing their positions. Morrison was beginning to understand the scope of the tactical problem. So you're proposing to go in without any electronic support whatsoever? I'm proposing to go in with equipment that works in conditions where modern gear fails, Elena corrected. The canyon environment neutralizes technological advantages, which means success depends on fundamental skills and mechanical reliability. Elena retrieved her medical kit, a collection of supplies that emphasized practical field treatment over sophisticated monitoring equipment. Bandages, sutures, morphine, antibiotics, and instruments that could be used to perform emergency surgery under primitive conditions. Everything was designed to function without electrical power or computer assistance. The previous teams, Elena said, when their equipment failed, what happened? Morrison consulted his tablet again. Communication breakdowns, navigation failures, weapon malfunctions. One team reported that their night vision systems stopped working completely, leaving them blind in darkness. Elena nodded grimly. Electronic systems fail in Black Rock Canyon because the mineral composition creates electromagnetic fields that interfere with sensitive equipment, but mechanical systems continue functioning because they don't depend on electronic components. She assembled her full kit methodically, each piece of equipment chosen for reliability rather than technological sophistication. The total weight was substantial, but Elena moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had carried similar loads across hostile terrain for years. There's something else you should know, Morrison said quietly. The Collector has been monitoring government communications. He knows about every team we've sent, every tactical plan we've developed, every piece of equipment in our inventory. Elena felt the familiar chill of facing an intelligent adversary. Inside information? Possibly. Or superior surveillance capabilities. Either way, he's been staying ahead of our operations by understanding our methods and equipment better than we understand his. Elena smiled grimly. Then we give him something he hasn't seen before. Equipment and tactics that predate his intelligence gathering, methods that aren't in any current military database because they've been officially obsolete for 20 years. Morrison watched Elena complete her equipment check, noting the way she handled each component with the confidence that came from years of practical experience. Her movements were economical and precise, wasting no motion on unnecessary actions. When do we leave? Elena asked. Morrison checked his watch. Transport leaves in 6 hours. The mission window opens at sunset tomorrow. Elena nodded, already calculating approach routes and contingency plans based on terrain she remembered from 15 years ago. I'll need complete tactical autonomy once we're in the canyon. No radio contact, no oversight, no interference from supporting units. That's highly irregular, Morrison protested. Standard procedure requires constant communication with command authority. Elena met his gaze with the steady calm of someone who had survived situations where standard procedure would have resulted in death. Standard procedure is why your previous teams failed. In Black Rock Canyon, following regulations will get you killed. She shouldered her equipment pack, the weight settling into familiar positions across her back and shoulders. The ancient gear felt like reconnecting with trusted friends, each component proven through use rather than theoretical testing. The Collector is expecting modern military tactics and contemporary equipment, Elena said. He's prepared for teams that depend on electronic systems and follow current operational doctrine. But he's not expecting someone who fights like it's 1990, using methods and equipment that officially don't exist anymore. Morrison was beginning to understand that Elena represented something unique in modern military operations, a throwback to an era when individual skill mattered more than technological support. Her equipment might look obsolete, but it embodied principles that had proven effective long before computers began assisting with tactical decisions. "There's one more thing," Elena said as they prepared to leave. "When this mission is over, when the girl is safe, you forget where you found me." Elena Martinez goes back to teaching teenagers how to shoot, and Phoenix 1 remains officially dead. Morrison nodded, recognizing that some agreements were more important than operational procedures. Understood. As they drove away from Mountain View tactical training, Elena watched her peaceful sanctuary disappear in the rearview mirror, knowing that regardless of the mission outcome, her quiet life in Clearwater was probably ending. But sometimes duty demanded sacrifices that couldn't be calculated in advance, and protecting innocent people was worth any personal cost. The ancient gear in her equipment pack seemed to hum with anticipation, ready to prove once again that sometimes the old ways were the only ways that worked when everything else failed. The staging area at Peterson Air Force Base buzzed with controlled chaos as Elena examined the intelligence package that Morrison had assembled for the Black Rock Canyon operation. Maps covered every available surface, marked with approach routes that had failed, and defensive positions that had proven impregnable to modern military tactics. The mission briefing room felt like a war council, where every previous strategy had ended in defeat. Elena spread her own maps across the table, hand-drawn charts that showed details missing from the satellite imagery and GPS surveys that formed the basis of contemporary military planning. These were field sketches created during her original mission 15 years ago, annotated with observations about wind patterns, sound propagation, and terrain features that couldn't be detected by remote sensing equipment. "The official maps don't show the acoustic properties of the canyon walls," Elena explained to the assembled tactical team. "Sound bounces in ways that make standard communication protocols useless. Whispers carry for hundreds of yards in some areas, while normal conversation is completely absorbed in others." Major Patricia Wells, the mission commander for the previous failed operations, studied Elena's annotations with professional interest mixed with obvious skepticism. Wells was career military, a graduate of advanced tactical schools who believed in technological solutions and comprehensive planning. Elena's primitive maps and handwritten notes represented everything that modern military doctrine had moved beyond. "These observations are 15 years old," Wells pointed out. Geological changes, erosion, vegetation growth, all of these factors could have altered the terrain significantly. Elena nodded toward the satellite images that showed Black Rock Canyon in high-resolution detail. "Look at the rock formations in Grid Square 7. Notice how the computer analysis indicates a clear line of sight between the northern ridge and the hostage location." Wells examined the imagery, noting the tactical assessment that suggested viable sniper positions overlooking the target area. "Confirmed. Multiple overwatch positions with clean sight lines." Elena smiled grimly. "Now look at this." She produced a photograph taken during her original mission, showing the same location from ground level. The image revealed massive stone pillars that rose from the canyon floor, creating visual obstructions that weren't apparent from aerial photography. "Satellite imagery shows what exists," Elena explained, "but it doesn't show how shadows move throughout the day, how light reflects off rock surfaces, or how thermal layers affect visibility. The northern ridge positions look perfect from above, but they're actually shooting galleries where the defender has every advantage." Captain Rodriguez, the team's communications specialist, examined Elena's radio frequency charts with growing confusion. The document showed propagation patterns that contradicted everything in his technical manuals, suggesting that standard military communication protocols would be completely ineffective in the canyon environment. "According to these notes," Rodriguez said, "VHF frequencies are completely absorbed by the mineral composition, while HF signals bounce unpredictably off the rock walls. But our current communication systems rely entirely on VHF digital transmission." Elena retrieved her ancient radio equipment, devices that looked like museum pieces compared to the sleek digital systems carried by contemporary military units. The radios were bulky and heavy, with analog dials instead of digital displays, but they transmitted clear signals on frequencies that modern forces had abandoned years ago. "The canyon acts like a natural electronic warfare environment," Elena explained. "Digital signals are corrupted, GPS satellites are blocked by the rock formations, and most modern equipment stops functioning properly. But analog systems work because they don't depend on complex electronic processing." Lieutenant Marcus Thompson, the youngest member of the tactical team, examined Elena's rifle with undisguised skepticism. Thompson carried a state-of-the-art weapon system that featured computerized fire control, laser range-finding, and ballistic calculation capabilities. Elena's rifle looked like something his grandfather might have used during World War II. "Ma'am, with respect," Thompson said, "modern weapons systems provide significant advantages in target acquisition and accuracy. The ballistic computer in my rifle can calculate windage and elevation automatically, compensating for environmental factors that would require extensive manual calculation." Elena accepted Thompson's rifle, noting its lightweight construction and advanced optics. The weapon was undeniably impressive, representing decades of technological advancement and sophisticated engineering. She examined the digital display that provided real-time information about range, wind speed, and atmospheric conditions. "This is excellent equipment," Elena agreed, "for normal operational environments. But in Black Rock Canyon, electronic systems become liabilities rather than assets." She led the team to an outdoor range where the base had constructed a simulated canyon environment using artificial rock walls and electronic interference generators. The setup was designed to replicate the challenging conditions that had defeated previous rescue attempts. "Lieutenant Thompson," Elena said, "engage the target at 400 yards using your standard weapon system." Thompson moved into position confidently, his rifle's electronic systems immediately beginning their automated targeting sequence. The digital display showed distance calculations and ballistic solutions that would normally guarantee accurate placement. But after 30 seconds, the display began flickering, then showed error messages as the electronic interference disrupted its operation. "System malfunction," Thompson reported, frustration evident in his voice. "The interference is corrupting the ballistic computer." Elena nodded, unsurprised by the failure. "Now observe." She shouldered her ancient rifle, settling into a shooting position that looked deceptively simple. Her scope was purely optical, without electronic components or digital displays. She estimated range using techniques that predated laser rangefinders, calculated windage by observing grass movement, and compensated for elevation using knowledge gained through decades of practical experience. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed off the artificial canyon walls. When they examined the target, Elena's bullet had struck dead center, achieving precision that Thompson's computer-assisted system couldn't match. "The principles of marksmanship haven't changed," Elena explained. "Breathing control, trigger squeeze, sight alignment, these fundamentals work regardless of technological support. But when you become dependent on electronic assistance, you lose the ability to function when that assistance fails." Major Wells was beginning to understand the scope of the tactical problem that had defeated her previous operations. "You're suggesting that our technological advantages actually became disadvantages in this specific environment?" Elena nodded. "The collector chose Black Rock Canyon precisely because it neutralizes modern military capabilities. He's probably been monitoring your communications, tracking your GPS signals, and using your own electronic signatures to anticipate your movements." She moved to a display showing the failed approach routes from previous rescue attempts. Each operation had followed similar patterns, using contemporary tactics that emphasized technological superiority and overwhelming firepower. The results had been consistently unsuccessful, with teams becoming disoriented and ineffective once their electronic systems failed. "Every team you've sent has followed current military doctrine," Elena observed. "Night vision systems, GPS navigation, digital communications, computer-assisted weapons, all of which becomes useless in an environment specifically chosen to defeat modern equipment." Captain Sarah Mitchell, the team's medical officer, examined Elena's first aid kit with professional interest. The supplies were comprehensive but primitive, emphasizing practical field treatment over sophisticated monitoring equipment. "No electronic vital signs monitoring," Mitchell observed. "No computerized drug delivery systems, no digital medical records. How do you maintain proper patient care without technological support?" Elena smiled, remembering field hospitals in Afghanistan, where electricity was intermittent and electronic equipment was a luxury rather than a necessity. Medical care existed long before computers. Pulse rate can be monitored manually, drug dosages can be calculated without digital assistance, and patient condition can be assessed through observation and experience. She, demonstrated traditional medical techniques that had been largely replaced by electronic systems in modern military medicine. Blood pressure measurement using manual cuffs, patient assessment through physical examination, and treatment protocols that didn't require constant electronic monitoring. Modern medical equipment provides excellent capabilities under ideal conditions, Elena explained. But in the field, you need skills that work when the power fails and the computers crash. The briefing continued with Elena explaining tactical approaches that predated contemporary military doctrine, movement techniques that emphasize stealth over speed, communication methods that used visual signals instead of radio transmission, and assault tactics that relied on individual skill rather than technological coordination. Colonel James Harrison, the base commander who had authorized Elena's involvement, listened to the tactical discussion with growing concern. Harrison was a veteran of multiple combat deployments, but his experience had been gained using modern equipment and contemporary methods. Elena's approach represented a fundamental departure from everything he considered professional military practice. "Miss Martinez," Harrison said carefully, "what you're describing sounds like reverting to World War II tactics and equipment. Modern military forces have advanced beyond these methods for good reasons." Elena met his gaze with the calm confidence of someone who had survived situations where advanced methods had failed. Modern military forces are optimized for conventional warfare against adversaries who follow predictable patterns. But the collector isn't fighting a conventional war. He's created a tactical environment specifically designed to neutralize your advantages. She pointed to intelligence reports that showed the collector's background and operational history. The files revealed a former special operations officer who had extensive experience with both contemporary military tactics and the equipment used to implement them. He knows exactly how modern units operate because he helped develop current tactical doctrine, Elena continued. He understands your communication protocols, your movement patterns, your weapons capabilities, and your dependence on electronic systems. Every team you send is using methods that he helped create. The realization hit the assembled officers like a physical blow. Their adversary wasn't just familiar with current military capabilities. He had participated in creating them. Every technological advantage they possessed was something he understood intimately and had already figured out how to counter. Morrison consulted his files, cross-referencing the collector's service record with the timeline of modern tactical development. He was involved in developing current special operations doctrine from 2005 to 2015. Radio protocols, GPS navigation standards, night vision integration, digital communication systems. Elena nodded grimly. "Which means he knows the vulnerabilities of every system you're using. But my equipment and methods predate his involvement. He's never encountered tactics from the 1990s because they were considered obsolete by the time he began his career." Lieutenant Thompson was struggling to accept the implications of Elena's assessment. His entire military education had emphasized technological superiority and sophisticated equipment as the foundation of effective combat operations. "But ma'am," Thompson protested, "advanced equipment provides measurable advantages in accuracy, communication range, situational awareness, and target acquisition. How can older methods possibly be more effective?" Elena walked to a wall map showing Black Rock Canyon's topography, pointing to areas where previous teams had encountered difficulties. "Your advanced equipment provides advantages under normal conditions. But Black Rock Canyon isn't normal. It's a technological dead zone where electronic systems fail and sophisticated equipment becomes useless weight." She traced the failed approach routes with her finger, showing how each team had been detected and defeated at predictable points in their advance. Every team followed similar patterns because they were using similar equipment and tactics. GPS navigation led them along routes that seemed optimal but were actually killing zones. Digital communications made them easy to track and monitor. Night vision systems failed in the canyon's unique electromagnetic environment. Captain Rodriguez examined Elena's communication plan, which relied entirely on predetermined signals and timing rather than real-time coordination. The approach seemed primitive compared to the instant connectivity that modern military units took for granted. "Without radio communication," Rodriguez asked, "how do you coordinate with supporting units or call for assistance if the situation deteriorates?" Elena's expression grew serious. "You don't. This mission requires complete tactical independence. No radio contact, no electronic support, no outside assistance. Success depends entirely on individual capability and equipment reliability. The concept of operating without electronic support was almost incomprehensible to officers who had been trained in an era of constant connectivity and real-time information sharing. Modern military doctrine emphasized network-centric warfare, where individual units functioned as part of larger integrated systems. Major Wells reviewed Elena's mission timeline, noting the extended periods without any form of external communication. 12 hours of complete radio silence. No GPS updates, no situation reports, no coordination with supporting elements. From a command perspective, this is extremely irregular. Elena nodded, understanding the institutional resistance to methods that violated current military standards. Irregular situations require irregular solutions. The Collector has defeated every conventional approach because he understands conventional tactics better than the people using them. She moved to her equipment display, showing weapons and gear that had been carefully maintained despite decades of official obsolescence. Each item represented a different approach to solving tactical problems, methods that emphasized mechanical reliability over electronic sophistication. This equipment was designed by people who understood that soldiers operate in environments where technology fails, Elena explained. Desert sand that clogs electronic systems, jungle humidity that corrodes circuits, Arctic cold that freezes batteries, electromagnetic interference that disrupts signals. Elena demonstrated the manual operation of her rifle's action, showing how each component functioned without electronic assistance. The mechanism was robust and simple, designed to operate under conditions that would disable more sophisticated weapons. Modern military equipment is optimized for ideal conditions, she continued. Climate-controlled environments, reliable power sources, clear communication channels, unobstructed GPS reception. But combat rarely provides ideal conditions. Colonel Harrison was beginning to understand that Elena represented more than just alternative tactics. She embodied a completely different philosophy about military effectiveness. Her approach emphasized individual capability over technological support, mechanical reliability over electronic sophistication. Miss Martinez, Harrison said slowly, what you're proposing represents a fundamental departure from current military doctrine. The risks associated with operating without electronic support are substantial. Elena met his gaze with the steady confidence of someone who had survived those risks repeatedly. The risks associated with depending on electronic systems that fail at critical moments are greater. Your previous teams discovered that when their equipment stopped working and they found themselves blind and deaf in hostile territory. She retrieved intelligence photographs showing the aftermath of the failed rescue attempts. Equipment abandoned when electronic systems malfunctioned, communication gear that had proven useless in the canyon environment, and tactical positions that had been compromised by electronic signatures that revealed friendly locations to the enemy. The Collector isn't just familiar with your equipment, Elena said. He's counting on your dependence on systems that he knows how to defeat. Every electronic device you carry sends signals that he can detect and track. Every GPS coordinate you transmit gives him advance warning of your movements. Elena's ancient equipment operated on principles that predated the electronic warfare capabilities that the Collector had mastered. Mechanical systems that functioned without power sources, optical devices that didn't emit detectable signatures, and communication methods that couldn't be intercepted or jammed. Morrison consulted the mission timeline, noting the narrow window available for the rescue operation. Senator Hawthorne's daughter has been missing for 4 days. Intelligence suggests that the Collector plans to move her to a secondary location within 48 hours. Elena nodded, understanding that time pressure was adding urgency to an already complex situation. The Collector knows that extended operations favor the defender. He's using time as a weapon, forcing us to attempt increasingly desperate approaches as the window closes. She studied the tactical assessments from previous missions, noting patterns that suggested sophisticated surveillance capabilities. The Collector had demonstrated knowledge of every approach route, every timing plan, and every piece of equipment that had been employed against him. But there's something he doesn't know, Elena said quietly. He's never faced an opponent using tactics and equipment from before his time. Methods that aren't in any database he can access. Techniques that predate the electronic systems he relies on for intelligence gathering. The briefing room fell silent as the implications of Elena's approach became clear. She wasn't just proposing to use different equipment. She was suggesting a return to fundamental principles, that modern military forces had abandoned in favor of technological solutions. Elena shouldered her equipment pack, the ancient gear settling into familiar positions that spoke of decades of practical use. The weight was substantial, but every component had been proven through actual combat rather than laboratory testing. "In 6 hours," she said, "we insert at the northern approach to Black Rock Canyon. No radio contact, no electronic support, no technological assistance. Just skills, experience, and equipment that works when everything else fails." As the team began final preparations, Elena felt the familiar calm that preceded dangerous operations. The mockery she had endured about her outdated equipment was about to be replaced by something far more serious, and she would need every advantage that her ancient gear could provide to bring Jessica Hawthorne home safely. The insertion helicopter dropped Elena at the canyon's rim just as the last light faded from the western sky, leaving her alone in wilderness that seemed to swallow sound and movement like a living entity. The pilot's final words had been apologetic, explaining that electronic interference made precision landing impossible and that pickup coordination would have to rely entirely on predetermined timing rather than radio communication. Elena watched the aircraft disappear into darkness, its navigation lights quickly absorbed by the vast emptiness of the Colorado Plateau. Standing on the edge of Black Rock Canyon, Elena felt the familiar weight of complete tactical isolation. No backup, no electronic support, no possibility of calling for assistance if the situation deteriorated beyond her ability to control. The ancient equipment on her back represented her only advantages in an environment specifically designed to neutralize modern military capabilities. The descent into the canyon required skills that contemporary soldiers rarely developed: techniques for moving through vertical terrain without mechanical assistance, or safety equipment. Elena's boots found purchase on rock surfaces that would have defeated anyone dependent on technological aids, her movements silent and controlled as she navigated passages that existed only in her hand-drawn maps from 15 years ago. The canyon walls rose around her like the architecture of some prehistoric cathedral, stone formations that had been carved by geological forces operating across millennia. Sound behaved strangely in this environment, with whispers carrying impossible distances while normal conversation was completely absorbed by the rock surfaces. Elena moved through shadows that seemed dense enough to provide physical concealment, her breathing controlled and her senses hyper-alert to any indication of hostile presence. Her first indication that the collector's surveillance network was more sophisticated than intelligence reports had suggested came 30 minutes into her descent, when she noticed infrared tripwires spanning narrow passages at strategic choke points. The detection system was invisible to normal vision, but clearly visible through her ancient night vision equipment, which operated on frequencies that modern countermeasures hadn't been designed to address. Elena studied the sensor network with professional appreciation for its designer's tactical knowledge. The placement demonstrated intimate familiarity with human movement patterns through difficult terrain, positioning detection devices at points where intruders would naturally pause to rest or assess their surroundings. A conventional military team would have triggered multiple alarms within the first hour of their approach. But Elena's ancient equipment operated below the technological threshold that the sensors had been calibrated to detect. Her rifle emitted no electronic signature, her communication gear transmitted on frequencies that modern monitoring systems ignored, and her movement techniques predated the behavioral patterns that contemporary surveillance systems were programmed to recognize. She bypassed the detection network using skills that had been developed before electronic warfare became a standard military discipline, techniques for moving through hostile territory without triggering alarms, or leaving traces that could be analyzed by sophisticated intelligence-gathering systems. Each step was calculated to avoid pressure plates hidden beneath loose rock, each pause timed to coincide with natural sound patterns that would mask any noise from her equipment. The path Elena followed diverged significantly from the approach routes that previous rescue teams had attempted, taking her through passages that satellite imagery had dismissed as impassable. But her hand-drawn maps revealed details that remote sensing couldn't detect, showing natural chimneys and hidden ledges that provided access to areas that appeared completely isolated from aerial perspective. 2 hours into the mission, Elena reached the observation point that she had identified during her original reconnaissance 15 years ago. The position offered clear sightlines to the hostage location while remaining concealed from defensive positions that controlled the more obvious approach routes. From this vantage point, she could see the compound where Jessica Hawthorne was being held, a collection of temporary structures that had been positioned to maximize defensive advantages while minimizing exposure to outside observation. Through her rifle scope, Elena counted 12 hostiles maintaining security positions around the compound perimeter. Their equipment was modern and sophisticated, featuring night vision systems and communication gear that represented significant financial investment. But their positioning revealed tactical assumptions about how rescue attempts would be conducted, preparations for assault methods that Elena had no intention of using. The collector himself was visible through a partially open tent flap, a man in his 40s with the controlled bearing of someone accustomed to command authority. He moved with the confidence of an adversary who had defeated every previous attempt to reach him, monitoring multiple electronic displays that showed the status of his surveillance network and communication with outside support elements. Elena observed the compound for over an hour, noting patrol patterns and security procedures that demonstrated professional military training. The guards rotated at precise intervals, maintained excellent noise discipline, and positioned themselves to provide overlapping fields of fire that would devastate any conventional assault. Their equipment included thermal imaging systems that would detect normal body heat signatures at substantial distances. But Elena's approach relied on capabilities that the defensive plan hadn't anticipated. Her position was beyond the effective range of thermal detection equipment, her movement had avoided all electronic surveillance systems, and her weapons could engage targets at distances that exceeded the defender's ability to locate muzzle flashes in the canyon's complex acoustic environment. The compound's layout revealed the collector's understanding of siege warfare principles. Water and food supplies were positioned to sustain extended operations, communication equipment maintained contact with external support networks, and defensive positions were prepared for assaults from multiple directions. But the design assumed that attackers would follow contemporary military doctrine, using electronic coordination and technological support that could be detected and countered. Elena's ancient rifle scope showed details that modern electronic systems would have enhanced automatically, but her optical equipment required no power source and emitted no detectable signals. The mechanical precision of her weapon's action allowed for accurate placement of shots at ranges that exceeded the capabilities of most contemporary marksmen, particularly in an environment where electronic fire control systems had proven unreliable. Jessica Hawthorne was visible through the compound's central tent, a young woman whose bearing suggested she was maintaining psychological composure despite her circumstances. Elena noted that the hostage appeared uninjured and alert, indicating that the collector was preserving her condition for whatever larger purpose motivated his actions. Elena's tactical assessment revealed vulnerabilities in the defensive arrangement that previous rescue teams had been unable to exploit. The compound's electronic security systems created blind spots that could be penetrated using movement techniques that predated digital surveillance technology. Guard rotations followed patterns that left brief windows of opportunity for someone with the patience and skill to wait for optimal timing. Most importantly, the collector's confidence in his technological advantages had led him to underestimate threats that operated outside contemporary military parameters. His surveillance network was calibrated to detect modern equipment signatures, his communication monitoring focused on frequencies used by current military units, and his defensive preparations assumed assault methods that emphasized overwhelming firepower rather than individual precision. Elena began her approach to the compound using infiltration techniques that had been developed for operations against adversaries who possessed technological superiority. Movement patterns that minimized visual signature, breathing control that reduced thermal emissions, and timing that synchronized with natural sound patterns to mask any noise from equipment or clothing. The ancient gear on her back had been designed for exactly these conditions, equipment that functioned silently and reliably without requiring electronic support or emitting detectable signatures. Her rifle's action operated with mechanical precision that produced minimal sound. Her clothing was constructed from materials that absorbed rather than reflected electromagnetic radiation, and her movement techniques had been perfected through operations where detection meant death. Elena's first target was a sentry positioned to control the northern approach route, a location that would provide access to the compound's less heavily defended perimeter. The guard was equipped with sophisticated night vision equipment and thermal imaging capabilities. But his position had been chosen based on assumptions about how contemporary military units would conduct their assault. The shot was taken from a range that exceeded the sentry's ability to detect muzzle flash in the canyon's complex acoustic environment. Elena's rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed off multiple rock surfaces, creating confusion about the origin of the sound that would have been impossible to achieve with modern weapons equipped with electronic flash suppressors and sound-dampening systems. The sentry dropped silently, his sophisticated equipment rendered useless by a bullet fired from a rifle that his surveillance systems had never detected. Elena's ancient weapon had struck with precision that electronic fire control systems couldn't have matched in the canyon's challenging environmental conditions. Elena moved immediately after firing, relocating to a secondary position that she had identified during her reconnaissance. The compound's response was swift and professional, with remaining guards moving to investigate the sentry's position while maintaining security protocols that demonstrated excellent training and discipline. But their investigation focused on areas where modern sniper systems would have positioned themselves, searching for electronic signatures and thermal emissions that Elena's equipment didn't produce. Their night vision systems were calibrated for contemporary threats, unable to detect someone using optical equipment that operated on different principles than current military technology. Elena's second shot eliminated a guard who was coordinating the security response using radio communication that revealed his position to anyone monitoring the correct frequencies. The ancient radio equipment in Elena's pack allowed her to intercept communications that modern encryption systems would have protected, but the collector's team was using frequencies and protocols that predated current security measures. The psychological impact of losing 2 sentries to an invisible adversary began to affect the remaining guards' discipline and effectiveness. Their movements became more cautious and less coordinated. Their communication patterns revealed growing uncertainty about the nature of the threat they were facing. Elena continued her methodical elimination of perimeter security, using patience and precision rather than the overwhelming firepower that contemporary military doctrine emphasized. Each shot was calculated to maximize confusion while minimizing the defender's ability to locate her position or coordinate an effective response. The collector's voice was audible through intercepted radio transmissions, revealing frustration with his team's inability to locate an adversary who was operating outside their technological detection capabilities. His commands became increasingly urgent as he realized that someone had penetrated his defensive network, using methods that his surveillance systems couldn't track or counter. Elena reached the compound perimeter after eliminating 6 sentries without triggering any electronic alarms or revealing her position to the remaining defenders. Her approach had exploited every weakness in a defensive plan that assumed attackers would use contemporary equipment and follow current tactical doctrine. The final assault required techniques that Elena had learned during operations where stealth mattered more than speed, where individual capability was more important than technological support. She moved through the compound using skills that predated the electronic warfare capabilities that the collector relied on for tactical advantage. Jessica Hawthorne was being held in the central tent, guarded by the collector himself and 2 remaining sentries who had positioned themselves to control all apparent approach routes. But Elena's ancient equipment allowed her to penetrate their defensive perimeter using methods that contemporary security training hadn't prepared them to counter. The confrontation came when Elena appeared in the tent entrance like a ghost materializing from shadows. Her rifle trained on the collector with mechanical precision that electronic targeting systems couldn't have achieved in the tent's confined space. The ancient weapon represented capabilities that the collector had never encountered, threats that existed outside his understanding of contemporary military operations. "Phoenix 1," the collector said quietly, his voice carrying a mixture of respect and resignation. "I should have known that someone would eventually dig up legends from the past." Elena maintained her firing position, her ancient rifle steady in hands that had learned precision through decades of practice, rather than electronic assistance. "Release the girl and surrender your weapons. This ends now." The collector studied Elena's equipment with professional interest, noting gear that he recognized from historical military references but had never encountered in actual combat. Impressive. Equipment and tactics from an era when individual skill mattered more than technological support. "I've spent years preparing for every contemporary threat, but I never considered that someone might use obsolete methods." Jessica Hawthorne remained calm during the confrontation, her bearing suggesting she understood that rescue was finally at hand. Elena noted that the young woman had maintained psychological composure throughout her captivity, demonstrating resilience that would be crucial during the extraction process. The collector's surrender was swift and professional, recognizing that his technological advantages had been neutralized by an adversary who operated according to principles that his defensive preparations hadn't anticipated. His sophisticated surveillance network, electronic countermeasures, and modern weapons had proven useless against someone using equipment and tactics that predated his operational experience. Elena secured the compound methodically, ensuring that no additional threats remained while preparing Jessica Hawthorne for immediate extraction. The ancient gear that had drawn mockery from contemporary military personnel had proven decisive in an environment where modern equipment had consistently failed. The extraction route required Elena to guide Jessica through terrain that would have been impossible to navigate using GPS coordinates or electronic navigation aids. But Elena's hand-drawn maps and mechanical compass provided reliable guidance through passages that satellite imagery couldn't reveal, leading them safely beyond the collector's surveillance network. As they climbed toward the canyon rim where extraction was scheduled to occur, Elena reflected on the irony that her ancient equipment had succeeded where sophisticated military technology had failed. Sometimes the old ways weren't just effective, they were the only ways that worked when everything else fell apart. The helicopter that retrieved them carried Jessica Hawthorne to safety and the collector to federal custody, ending a crisis that had tested the limits of contemporary military capabilities. Elena's ancient gear had proven that individual skill and mechanical reliability could triumph over technological sophistication when conditions demanded fundamental competence rather than electronic assistance. Standing on the canyon rim as the extraction helicopter disappeared into darkness, Elena felt the satisfaction of a mission accomplished using methods that officially no longer existed. The mockery she had endured about her outdated equipment had been replaced by respect for capabilities that modern military forces had forgotten they once possessed. 3 weeks after the Black Rock Canyon operation, Elena Martinez stood in her workshop in Clearwater, Montana, methodically cleaning the rifle that had once again proven its worth against impossible odds. The weapon showed new scratches and wear marks from its journey through hostile territory, but its mechanical action remained as precise as the day it had been manufactured 3 decades ago. The morning sun streamed through dusty windows, illuminating workbenches that looked exactly as they had before government agents had arrived to shatter her peaceful existence. The congressional hearing had been closed to the public, conducted in secure facilities where senators and military officials struggled to understand how a single operator using obsolete equipment had succeeded where multiple special operations teams had failed. Elena had testified for 6 hours, explaining tactical principles that most contemporary military leaders had forgotten existed, demonstrating techniques that predated their understanding of modern warfare. Senator Patricia Hawthorne had thanked Elena personally, her gratitude evident but tempered by the classified nature of the operation that had rescued her daughter. Jessica Hawthorne had recovered completely from her ordeal, returning to college with psychological resilience that impressed the counselors assigned to help her process the trauma. The young woman had specifically requested to meet Elena, expressing admiration for someone who had risked everything to bring her home safely. But the most significant outcome of the mission hadn't been the successful rescue or the capture of the collector's network. Military training facilities across the country were quietly beginning to reintroduce skills that had been abandoned in favor of technological solutions, recognizing that electronic systems created vulnerabilities as well as advantages. Marksmanship instructors were teaching manual range estimation techniques, communications specialists were learning to operate analog radio equipment, and tactical teams were practicing navigation using compass and map rather than GPS coordinates. Elena's workshop had become an unlikely pilgrimage site for military personnel who wanted to understand how pre-digital equipment could outperform contemporary systems under specific conditions. Officers arrived quietly, without official authorization, seeking knowledge that wasn't available in current training manuals or technical specifications. Elena shared what she could while maintaining the security classifications that protected sensitive operational details. The ancient rifle occupied its customary position in the gun rack, surrounded by other weapons that represented forgotten eras of military technology. Each firearm told a story of conflicts where individual skill had mattered more than electronic support, where mechanical reliability had proven more valuable than digital sophistication. Elena had maintained this collection not as museum pieces, but as functional tools that could still serve when modern alternatives failed. Major Patricia Wells had visited Elena personally, her skepticism about obsolete equipment replaced by professional respect for capabilities she hadn't previously understood. Wells was implementing new training protocols that emphasized fundamental skills alongside technological proficiency, ensuring that her personnel could function effectively when electronic systems were compromised or unavailable. The Black Rock Canyon operation taught us that we'd become too dependent on technology, Wells had explained during her visit. We'd forgotten that equipment failures don't excuse mission failures, that soldiers need skills that work regardless of technological support. Elena had nodded, understanding that military institutions were slowly recognizing truths that individual operators had learned through bitter experience. Technology provided tremendous advantages under ideal conditions, but combat rarely provided ideal conditions. Electronic systems failed, batteries died, communication networks were compromised, and GPS satellites were blocked by terrain or enemy action. Lieutenant Marcus Thompson had requested extended training with Elena's ancient equipment, his initial skepticism replaced by determination to master techniques that contemporary military education hadn't included. Thompson spent hours learning to estimate range manually, calculate windage using natural indicators, and operate weapons that required mechanical precision rather than electronic assistance. "I realized that I'd never learned to shoot," Thompson had admitted during one training session. "I'd learned to operate a computer that happened to be attached to a rifle. When the computer failed, I was helpless." Elena's instruction emphasized principles that couldn't be reduced to technical specifications or equipment manuals. Breathing control that synchronized with natural biorhythms. Trigger techniques that exploited muscle memory developed through thousands of repetitions. And sight alignment that relied on visual perception rather than digital displays. These skills required patience and practice, qualities that modern military training often sacrificed in favor of rapid technological familiarization. The mountain town of Clearwater had welcomed Elena back without questions, accepting her return to civilian life with the same discretion that had protected her anonymity for 15 years. The local teenagers resumed their shooting lessons, unaware that their instructor had recently completed a mission that would influence military training doctrine for decades to come. Elena's teaching methods had evolved subtly, incorporating lessons learned during her confrontation with technological overconfidence. She emphasized fundamental skills more strongly, ensuring that her students understood marksmanship principles that functioned regardless of equipment sophistication. The ancient rifle served as a teaching tool, demonstrating that precision came from operator capability rather than technological assistance. Jake Thompson, the teenager who had once complained about his rifle's inadequacy, had become Elena's most dedicated student. He practiced with iron sights until his accuracy matched what he had previously achieved only with computerized assistance, learning that skill development required patience and persistence rather than equipment upgrades. "Miss Martinez," Jake had said during a recent lesson, "I understand now why you use old equipment. It makes you learn the fundamentals instead of depending on technology to compensate for your mistakes." Elena smiled, recognizing that Jake had grasped concepts that many professional soldiers struggled to understand. Modern equipment could enhance performance, but it couldn't replace fundamental competence. When technology failed, only skill remained. The collector himself had provided unexpected validation for Elena's approach during his debriefing sessions with federal investigators. His analysis of the Black Rock Canyon operation revealed professional appreciation for tactics that had neutralized every advantage his technological superiority had provided. "Phoenix 1 succeeded because she operated outside our defensive parameters," the collector had explained to interrogators. "We had prepared for every contemporary threat, but we never considered that someone might use obsolete methods that predated our countermeasures." His network had been dismantled systematically, revealing connections to foreign intelligence services that had been purchasing classified military technology and tactical information. The investigation had exposed vulnerabilities in contemporary security systems that relied too heavily on technological solutions and insufficient attention to fundamental operational security. Elena's ancient communication equipment had proven crucial in gathering intelligence that led to additional arrests throughout the collector's organization. Radio frequencies that modern monitoring systems ignored had carried unencrypted transmissions revealing names, locations, and operational plans that sophisticated electronic surveillance had missed. The federal investigation had also revealed the extent to which contemporary military forces had become predictable through their dependence on standardized equipment and procedures. Adversaries who understood American technological capabilities could neutralize those advantages by creating operational environments where electronic systems failed or became liabilities rather than assets. Elena's workshop contained detailed documentation of these lessons, handwritten notes that analyzed the tactical implications of technological dependence. These records would eventually influence military doctrine, but for now they remained private reflections on the relationship between individual capability and institutional effectiveness. The ancient gear in Elena's equipment lockers had been supplemented with additional examples of pre-digital military technology, weapons and tools acquired from collectors and surplus dealers who specialized in functional historical equipment. Each acquisition was carefully evaluated for mechanical condition and operational reliability, ensuring that Elena's inventory remained tactically viable rather than merely historically interesting. Captain James Morrison had submitted recommendations for changes in military procurement policies, suggesting that special operations units maintain supplies of analog equipment for missions where electronic systems might prove unreliable. His proposals faced institutional resistance from procurement officials who emphasized standardization and technological advancement, but recent operational failures had created receptivity to alternative approaches. Elena's influence extended beyond individual training to broader questions about military effectiveness and technological vulnerability. Defense analysts were beginning to recognize that sophisticated equipment created dependencies that adversaries could exploit, particularly in environments where electronic systems were compromised by natural conditions or enemy action. The congressional testimony had been classified at levels that prevented public discussion, but military personnel who had access to the transcripts were sharing Elena's insights through unofficial channels. Training facilities were quietly implementing exercises that required personnel to operate without electronic assistance, testing their ability to function using fundamental skills rather than technological support. Elena's return to civilian life in Clearwater represented more than personal preference for anonymity. It embodied a philosophy about individual capability that transcended institutional authority. Military forces could provide sophisticated equipment and comprehensive training, but ultimate effectiveness depended on personal skills that couldn't be purchased or programmed. The ancient rifle in Elena's workshop would remain ready for future missions, its mechanical precision unchanged by political developments or technological advancement. But Elena hoped that future operators would understand the lessons that her equipment represented, recognizing that individual competence was more valuable than electronic sophistication when circumstances demanded fundamental capability. As evening settled over the Montana mountains, Elena reflected on the paradox that her success had created. Military institutions were beginning to rediscover skills they had abandoned, but they were doing so because contemporary methods had failed against adversaries who understood technological vulnerabilities better than the people who depended on technology. The mockery she had endured about her ancient combat gear had been replaced by respect for capabilities that modern military forces were struggling to reacquire. But Elena understood that respect for traditional methods would fade, as institutional memory diminished and new technologies promised easier solutions to complex problems. Standing in her workshop surrounded by equipment that had proven its worth through decades of operational use, Elena Martinez prepared for whatever challenges might emerge from a world that had forgotten how to function without electronic assistance. The woman who had officially died 15 years ago remained ready to demonstrate that sometimes the old ways were the only ways that worked when everything else failed. The legend of Phoenix One would continue inspiring those who understood that individual capability mattered more than technological support, that mechanical reliability was more valuable than electronic sophistication, and that ancient wisdom often provided better solutions than contemporary innovation. In her quiet sanctuary in Clearwater, Montana, Elena Martinez embodied truths that military institutions were finally beginning to rediscover. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.